We're all familiar with the murders that Lizzie Borden was accused of back in 1892. If not, maybe this little rum will give you a clue. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks, and when she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. In a nutshell, Lizzie was accused of murdering her stepmother and her dad with an axe. She was brought to trial, but later she was acquitted of the charges. Well, today's episode isn't about Lizzie Borden, though. It's about other not as popularly known murders that took place on the same property. And this story took place about 12 years before Lizzie was even born. And after we talk about those murders, there's a few more things in the same town that happened that we're going to talk about.
Mystery, murder, and magic, heroes, and Alice.
Welcome back for this week's episode. I'm Andrea, your host. Alex isn't with us today. He had some other things to do. But anyway, can't believe that we're already at episode 10. Time flies when you're having fun, for sure. But let's dig into this week's episode. Now, earlier I said it's not popularly known, but I should clarify that and say it's not as popularly known by me. I had never heard of that until I started doing the research for today's show. But I've always been fascinated by Lizzie Borden case, so I can't believe this interesting little tidbit from her family got by me like that. So, Lawdwig Borden was the son of Martha Patty Bowen and Richard Borden. Lawdwig's father was Lizzie's grandfather, so that makes Lawdwig her uncle or her great uncle, I believe. Over the years, Lawdwig had 4 wives: Maria Briggs, Eliza Darling, Eliza Chase, and Ruhama Crocker. Now, this story that I'm about to tell is about his second wife, Eliza Darling. Now, Eliza and Lawdwig, they were married on March 16th, 1842 in Fall River, Massachusetts. Over the next few years, Eliza gave birth to 3 children. Well, for no explained reason that I could find, in 1848, while the maid was gone outside to draw water from the well, Eliza took the children and threw them in the cistern that was in the cellar of the house. Now, that was only 6 years after she and Lawdwig had married. So, the oldest kid had to be no more than 6 years old, I believe. And I believe that the youngest was just a few months old. Now, the 2 youngest drowned, unfortunately. But that's not all that happened that day. After throwing the children into the water, Eliza went back upstairs and slit her throat with Lawdwig's straight razor. And other versions of the story says that she went behind the chimney that was in the cellar and slit her throat. But either way, she died almost immediately. Now, I haven't found anything that gave a reason for Eliza killing her kids like this. There's no good reason, of course, for something like this to happen. But I think that maybe it could have been postpartum depression. Now, that wasn't something that was an illness that was, known back then or talked about. And, of course, we don't know what was going on in her and Lawdwig's private home life. So it could have been any number of things that led her to drown her kids or attempt to drown all 3 of her kids. But it seems to me that it was probably postpartum depression. With the youngest being just a few months old. Now, the only child of the 3 that survived was the oldest, like I said, and her name was Maria. Now, it's thought that Maria was named after Lawdwig's first wife, Maria, because back in those days, it was customary to do that when a previous spouse had died at a young age. And I think I remember seeing that the first wife, Maria, was like 26 or 27 when she died, but I didn't see what she had died from. It could have been like some type of flu or any number of things, because people did seem to pass away at a young age back at those days. But Anyway, the daughter, Maria, she lived to be about 65 years old, and she was married to a man named Samuel B. Hinckley. And something that I found interesting about Samuel is that when Maria was 5, he was a boarder in the Borden house. Sorry about that. But yeah, he was a boarder in the Borden house. Now, Samuel had fought in the Civil War, and when he came out, he was a captain. And that's really all that I could find on Samuel and Maria, but it just seems like there wasn't a whole lot. But I did find this interesting little tidbit, and it's that the infamous serial killer, Eileen Wuornos, is related to the Bordens. She's Lizzie's 7th cousin 4 times removed. And another little thing that I found was that Marilyn Monroe is also a cousin somewhere down the line of Lizzie and Eileen. I didn't know that until I started doing this research. Now, I also found reference in the Borden family to the last name of Cornell. And there was a cousin of Lizzie's whose name was Rebecca Briggs Cornell. And she was murdered by her own son. And it just seems like there's a lot of murder that goes on in the Borden family. But anyway, his name was Thomas Jr. And he was put on trial and hanged for her murder. This is what I found so interesting about this case of Thomas Jr. and about killing his mom, Rebecca. The evidence that proved his guilty was that Rebecca had appeared in her brother's dream, and it don't really say what she told her brother in that dream, but I'm guessing she told him that her son had murdered her. But this is the evidence that proved that he was guilty, was her appearing in her brother's dream. Well, Thomas Jr.'s wife was pregnant when he was put on trial and hanged. 4 months later, she gave birth to a little girl that she named Innocent Cornell. I guess she just strongly felt that her husband wasn't guilty of his mother's murder. So I started realizing that what I had up until this point wouldn't make for a very long episode. And so I started digging around into the town of River Fall and see what else I could find about it. And I definitely didn't come up empty. So Fall River, I said River Fall. Fall River, sorry about that, my bad. Fall River is the 10th largest city in Massachusetts. And according to the 2010 census, the population is just over 88,000. It's located in Bristol County, and the town sits right on the edge of the Massachusetts border, but it's kind of like where there's like a little bay separating Massachusetts from Rhode Island. Now, long after the Borden murders took place, 3 homicides took place between October 1979 and February 1980. It was alleged that a Satanic cult was responsible for it, and the case became dubbed the Fall River Cult Murders, and this is also where the term Satanic Panic came from. So on October 13th, 1979, 17-year-old Doreen Levesque was murdered, and her body was discovered under the bleachers at the Diamond Vocational School by some joggers the next morning. Doreen was a prostitute from New Bedford, and she had been in foster care, and she had no fixed address. I guess she just was kind of, bounced from here to there. The night of her demise, she had traveled to Fall River to work with another prostitute. Witnesses say they had seen her downtown intoxicated and engaging in prostitution in the Pleasant Street area. The autopsy revealed she had been sexually assaulted and bludgeoned. She was identified after police released a composite drawing to local newspapers. Barbara Raposa was 19, a single mother, and like Doreen, she was also a prostitute. She was reported missing on November the 7th, 1979 by her father after she didn't show up to pick up her son from a babysitter. Now, friends said that the last time he had seen her was around 8:15 that evening when he dropped her off in downtown Fall River to do some prostitution work. On January 26, 1980, her body was discovered by hunters in a wooded area just outside of town. According to her autopsy, she had been killed shortly after the time she had last been seen. Now, the third victim in these murders was 20-year-old Karen Marsden. Karen was also a prostitute, and she wasn't a stranger to the police. As a matter of fact, earlier in the night, she had disappeared. But they had questioned her because they believed that, let me go back because I think I just messed up the whole sentence that I was trying to say. So, the night that Karen had disappeared, the police had questioned her because they believed she was a potential witness to the murder of Doreen Levesque. But Karen refused to identify the murderer. She also turned down witness protection, and she asked the police officer to drop her off at a church in town. The next day, she was reported missing by her grandmother. On April 13th, 1980, pieces of Karen's skull was found, but the rest of her remains have yet to be located. Now, a man by the name of Carl Drew was arrested and put on trial for the murder of Karen Marsden. At the time, he was 26 years old, a pimp, and he was a self-proclaimed devil worshiper. He even called himself the son of Satan, and said he had murdered Karen because she had been present when Doreen Levesque was murdered earlier. However, the state star witness, 18-year-old Robin Murphy, who was also a prostitute, made a deal with prosecutors for testifying against Drew. She said that she had actually murdered Karen because she was possessed by Satan. She went on to say that otherwise she wouldn't have murdered Karen because they were lesbian lovers and they were roommates. Now, from here, the details of Karen's murder they're pretty disturbing, but I'm going to just give you the gist of what happened. Murphy, Drew, and a few others drove Karen to a wooded area where her neck was broken, she was decapitated, and she was stabbed multiple times. Miss Murphy also said that Drew spoke a foreign language while carrying out his part. She also said that she had attended previous cult meetings and the death of Doreen Levesque was a sacrifice for the soul of Satan. In a second trial for the murder of Barbara Raposa, Robin Murphy testified again, but this time it was against Andre Melte. She said that she was present during the murder, but there are also documents that say she participated in this murder also. In 1981, Drew and Melte, were both found guilty of the murders they were accused of, and both were sentenced to life in prison without parole. Now, Robin Murphy was also found guilty on lesser charges and was in prison until she was granted parole in 2004, but she violated her parole while she was out, and she was put back in prison in 2011. She came up for parole again in 2017, but was denied, but she'll be eligible to apply for parole again in 2020, so next year she might be out and about again. So that was a bit gruesome, and I didn't even go into the full details about Karen Marsden's murder, so I'm going to switch gears slightly. So before I wrap it up today, I'd like to mention that there are no new updates on the short story I brought to you last week of the missing ladies from Oconee County, that area. I was hoping to have something new on it this week. There's also no new updates on the body that was found in the freezer in Orangeburg County either. Well, on that note, that's all I have for this episode. Thanks for listening, and as always, if you have any episode ideas, questions, or comments, send us an email. And I did change the email address, so it'd be something easier and shorter. And that new email address is 3, as in the number 3. It's not spelled out, just a 3. mpodcast, and the number 3 again, @gmail.com. And be sure to check out